Today I'm going to talk about REST matters, and you need more of it. So most of us, or companies, startups, developers, we've been developing using RESTful architectures, RESTful APIs, REST itself, but we've never really stopped and asked ourselves why in the first place. Some of us have and then moved on to develop software using SOAP, but very few of us have stopped and asked themselves, why do we use this REST? And what is this REST in the first place? What are the advantages of REST over the SOAP or CORBA, which were introduced way before REST itself and which are more secure in some form? So I'm going to dive in straight. So I'm basically trying to explain what is REST, advantages of REST, and trying to demystify it so that we can all understand it and be on the same page. Yes, so this is a Google Developers Expert event. We'll skip that. Let's dive in. So the meaning of REST, we all know that. I hope so. But it's basically representational state transfer. It was defined by Thomas Fielding when he was making his doctorate dissertation. One thing I need to make clear right now, or a few things I need to make clear right now is, one, REST is not an API. It is used in the API's architecture. It is not an API. Two, REST is not a protocol. SOAP is a protocol. Three, REST is not a standard. It is not a must to use it. You can develop web applications however you want it, but it is not like a specific standard. Four, it is not a drop-in replacement for SOAP. You cannot just say today I want to replace a SOAP API with REST immediately. So now that we are on the same page with those few facts, let's move on. So if I describe REST with the shortest or with the fewest words possible, REST is a non-XML based, web-based RPC or RMI. RPC basically means remote procedure call or remote method invocation if you're using object-oriented programming or frameworks. REST works entirely on HTTP standard. It heavily depends on HTTP because it defines all its standards or all its architecture using HTTP. Robert Fielding, when he came up with the REST system architecture, at the same time, HTTP was on version 1, and he was also working at HTTP version 1.1. HTTP version 1.1 introduced 4 other methods in HTTP, which are basically put, post, update, and later on, a few more others were introduced. We'll go through that together. It heavily relies on JSON. We all know that when you hear about REST, the next thing we think about is JavaScript and JSON, or Ajax. It heavily relies on JSON, but it is not a fact or it is not a must that you use JSON with it. You can use XML, you can use HAL, or you can use YAML, yet another markup language, to send data to and fro. REST is data-driven. As the SOAP API, which came out in 1998, is when the internet was growing up, and with remote procedure call, we thought that the methods or the programming that we do in our laptop, basically when you're going to put it in the internet, is just taking the same functions, putting them in a server, and letting people call those servers. But now we've moved to a world where data is the new gold. And if data is the new gold, you need a way of at least protecting it, and REST allows us to do that in some small ways. And because of that, it is mostly data-driven because people are asking for data or asking to read data, and they're not asking to do procedures or calls or specific actions. So I think when I went through my research about REST is that the biggest advantage REST has over SOAP, and why you'll ask me, why am I comparing it with SOAP? SOAP was the architecture it's actually a protocol. SOAP was the protocol which was being used before REST was introduced. And when REST was introduced, it changed almost everything. And some people still use SOAP, which is not a bad thing. It's a very good thing to use SOAP depending on your system's architecture. But because most people have moved to REST, even if like because like REST is easily to set up and SOAP is not. But SOAP sometimes offers more security, offers more stability. But the biggest advantages of REST over SOAP is flexibility. Because REST, you can change your system's architecture per minute basis, per second basis, or even every day, without affecting your client's consumption of the same data. So for example, if my client was consuming about car models, and I had not added the colors of the cars, if I add colors of the cars in a SOAP API, the clients who are consuming my API need to restructure the API. Like they need to change stuff. I need to tell them, and they need to change the stuff. In REST, they don't have to. They continue consuming the same API. SOAP has something called WSDL, Web Services Definition Language, where basically you're creating a contract between you and your client. That, hey, this is a contract, I've opened the connections for you, you can now start consuming. But if I change something, the WSDL needs to change. And if it changed, it means that we need to like our contract has changed, and we need to like create a new contract with them. So the biggest advantage of REST, according to me, it is very flexible. You can make APIs that stand the test of time. SOAP is clunky, but still works. SOAP makes you put everything in that file that you're sending, or let's say the data resource that you're sending. You put your request details, your response details, your statuses details, and your links and your data inside the SOAP itself. In REST, you don't. Most of the things have been defined for you, and so REST the only thing you have to do is send the data itself. REST uses HTTP, as I said, and the biggest advantages of HTTP is that since HTTP 1.1, we have so many verbs to use with REST. And so REST is defined using these verbs. There are more verbs, such as head, patch, options, link, and unlink. So an example of how we use REST. If I was creating a place where I can sell music, one, if I wanted you to see all the albums that I have, I can say music album / album. You'll see all the albums. Basically, I'd make this a GET request. Music albums, maybe the ID of the album for a specific album which you wanted to see. Upload an album, the songs and the epic music that you're supposed to upload. This could have been a post request. So the other good thing about REST is that the status codes have been defined for us. In SOAP, we have to define them by ourselves. And I don't know if it's good or bad, is that we can define however we want them. So we know that the status 200 in HTTP means everything is okay. In SOAP, we can say HTTP 300, no, like status code 300 is okay, yet in HTTP 300 means redirection. And in SOAP, you can use 300 if you want to, because you're the one who's defining your status codes. In HTTP, they've already been defined for you, so you're using the ones which are existing. For page not found, for 1, for unauthorized, and so forth. REST is cacheable, but it is only cacheable if you use idempotent requests. What are idempotent requests? These are requests which use the HTTP verb head, HTTP verb get, and HTTP verb options. All other requests are not idempotent. Idempotent basically means that you can make the requests as many times as possible, and each and every request does not rely on the previous request that you made. So a GET request basically, and an options and a head request is cacheable. So meaning that if you made your first request to the servers, and for example, maybe you need to make this request 1,000 times a day, it means that I don't have to process this request 1,000 times. It means that it can be cached, and that the next time you make this request, you'll basically fetch it from where it's been cached, and it will be fast that way, because maybe a request, when I process it, it takes me 3 seconds, but when it's cached, you'll get it immediately back. So that goes down to even 10 to 20 even microseconds. Oh, so one thing I need to make clear. SOAP uses HTTP post. a post is not idempotent, so meaning the request cannot be cached. So if you're going to make a request using SOAP, you have to make the request every time, and it will take the same length for every request. I don't know if this is a major advantage of a SOAP, but personally, I don't believe that. I believe that SOAP is a little bit more secure with the introductions of WP security and a few other protocols that it uses. REST can be secured though. It can be secured using HTTPS, basically sending your request over a secure protocol. And you can use services such as system architectures such as OAuth2 and JavaScript Web Tokens, JWT. So you can actually secure your REST APIs and everything else using HTTPS, OAuth, or even JWT. SOAP comes with one inbuilt like WP security, and according to what I read, according to what I researched about, WP security seems much more secure than REST, but it doesn't mean that REST is any less secure. Almost my last point is REST is stateless. Basically, stateless means that, let me give you an example, is that when the internet was starting out and when we are moving like our systems to the web, the introduction of remote procedure calls, basically we were taking our application code and putting it in a server and saying that if you want a certain thing to be done, you have to ping this specific function. In REST, it's different. We use URIs, which are very readable, as I've shown you before, like stroke album, stroke music, and that way, basically, helps us hide a lot of information from the user or the client who's consuming it. The client does not need to know which kind of server we are running. We can be running on Windows, we can be running on Linux, we can be running on Mac OS. The client also does not need to know which programming language we are programming our system with. So we can be feeding him data, or he or she can be consuming data, but he or she does not need to know that the data is being provided by Python, by Ruby, and us on the other side, with the servers, we do not need to know who the client is. If the client is using a mobile phone, if the client is using a laptop, if the client is actually making requests via a fridge by the introductions of IoT, if the client is making requests via their watch, if the client is making requests via speakers, via chairs, whatever IoT goes into. As I mentioned before, all requests are independent. Every request you make does not depend on the previous request that you made. Some requests are independent, meaning that the request can be made more than one time, and also it means that, I think I've lost that point. But I said, like, yeah, so independent basically means that you can make the request several times, and each request is independent. And because each request is independent also, we do not need to know the servers, and it's stateless. I basically lost the point somewhere in my head, but if I find it, I'll go through it again. So another big advantage of REST is because when almost everything has been done for us, as developers, we get to be lazy. We get to be very lazy because most of the things have been done for us. So basically, we're setting up our systems very fast with little effort and using the current standards that or the systems architecture that have already been set for us. And the other thing is that with this age, the age of tools, we have a tool for almost everything or every form of development we can develop with. So for example, if you're going to test our REST APIs, there's a very famous tool known as Postman, which has risen over the years. And I'm sure that every developer who uses REST has come by this Postman tool, software tool. So, as I said, we get to be lazy because there is no existing learning curve. We basically dive in. And in this age where time is really important, when people need to create things at a very fast pace, REST supports that. REST encourages it. So my last point, and my laptop has slept. And my last point, because everything has been defined for us, and you're using architectures or software pieces that are already ready for us, we get to ship and test our projects every day, every second. And that's the fun of it. Like, we create a system right now, we test it, blows on our face, we go back, fix it, and continue life and make it better every day, every second, every hour. I don't think it has been abandoned. I see still major advantages of SOAP. One major difference between, okay, there are a lot of major differences between SOAP and REST, but SOAP is action oriented. REST is data oriented. Like, if basically want to fetch data, REST is okay. Basically, you want to carry some form of transactions or some form of requests, specific request, SOAP is okay. Then the other thing is SOAP lets you, like, because it's really strict, it lets you control how you're serving your data to your client. So if you look at Safaricom uses SOAP. When they released the G2 API, people complained a lot. And when they complain, this is where I also complain, because I'm this kid in the 21st century who has come out, and the newest thing in the block is REST, and it's really awesome, it's really easy to use. And because I get to be lazy, I get excited about it. Then when it gets to SOAP, it's pretty complicated, because like you need a VPN, like you need a server that connects directly to Safaricom because there's a contract you're locking on to Safaricom. Safaricom needs you to be secure while you're locking onto them, and you'd blame them, but if you look at what they're actually serving, they're serving M-Pesa. M-Pesa has like over 1 million users, maybe 14 million according to our population serve, because almost all of us uses like M-Pesa. M-Pesa is a finance system. It deals with money. So if you think about it, it does not make sense, complete sense, like them using REST. It makes sense them having control of the whole architecture, the whole system, and making it secure. And like saying, like if you want to connect with us, you have to be secure, you have to follow these specific SOAP protocols, because SOAP is a protocol, it's very strict, it's a protocol itself. So if you look at it, I think that the continuation of development of SOAP, I think it's still there. And I remember a few months ago when I wanted to play around with the M-Pesa API, I had to get a lot of knowledge around XML and how to work with SOAP. And because of that, there are things like defining your SOAP request, how you're supposed to make it. Because I didn't know it well, and because I live in the age of tools, I went online to look for a tool. What did I find? I found a tool. It's called SOAP UI. It's on version 5. Version 5 basically means it's in development and it's being developed. Yeah. So I don't think it has stopped. SOAP is still an alternative to REST, depending on how you want to structure a system. I feel that financial systems are okay using SOAP because they get more control over their systems compared to REST. It actually doesn't affect REST at all. I'd say they might. Rob Fielding, he might look into the REST architecture himself or somebody else, and maybe improve upon the current state of REST. REST is not like really hard to learn. You can take a few hours to learn REST. That you need to make specific GET requests using these specific URIs. You need to secure them using HTTPS. You need to know JWT and OAuth. So if you look at it, and here's the funny thing. People think like REST has been in continuous development, but no. It was actually a dissertation by Rob Fielding, and it was released at the same time HTTP 1.1 was released, and that is 1998. So ever since 1998, REST hasn't really modified itself a lot. So I believe REST will maintain its current state the way it is, or maybe be improved upon, because one disadvantage of REST is that if you wanted to make a specific execution, like a specific call to action, you couldn't. This basically is like you want a specific function to run in the servers. You couldn't make that happen. In SOAP, you can make that happen because you're actually calling an action and not like you're not fetching data or trying to change the data or alter it. So maybe that's one of the improvements I'd say REST has to make. But if you look at it, REST, the way it was structured for almost like the 21st century. He knew like data will be the thing like right now we'll be dealing with, because we fetch data from Google, we fetch data from Facebook. We don't really want to do any form of deep actions. We just really need to communicate with the servers. Yeah. When REST was released, when Rob released like the REST systems architecture, I don't think he had any specific programming language in mind. Of course, there were some specific languages that adopted REST architecture really fast. For example, the release of Ruby on Rails, which is one of the first object-oriented frameworks to support REST. But I'd say because JavaScript object notation is used a lot, JavaScript like works with REST really well. But at the same time, if you look over the years, people have been improving every programming language in the age. Like Python is moving to Python 3.0. Go just came out, so I wouldn't say that it has been improved. Ruby has been improved. It's in version 2.2 right now. But every programming language has been improved, and with improvements, they look at the current state of development, the current state of things people want to use, and then they fuse them into the languages themselves. Last year, we got the release of ES15 because we wanted classes and stuff like that because of JavaScript. We were saying, hey, JavaScript doesn't have classes, we want them, then they added them. But if you look at like REST itself, it's a system architecture. It is not tied to any programming language. So basically, we'd want like all programming languages to support it. And this is the case right now. But the problem is that as developers, we listen to the wind too much and not the person who's speaking in between the wind. So if you hear around from people will tell you, hey, Node.js is the best one to use with REST because JavaScript object notation, of course, came from JavaScript. But it doesn't mean these other languages did not implement it. If you go to Python, you see that the JavaScript object, the JSON file, when Python reads it, it maps everything to the Python objects. So for example, a string, of course, will map to a string. An object will map to a dictionary, and so forth and so forth. So I don't think there's a specific language which is better in dealing with like REST or JSON. But I believe that libraries help us to deal with things easier. And because like JavaScript, especially, which doesn't require a library, like it just snaps its fingers and deals with JSON easily, is the fastest one people will adopt because they say, hey, this one is easier to work with JSON. But if you look at like programming languages that have really good libraries on JSON, which like dealing with REST is, like dealing with JSON is seamlessly. In that spec, like I recently began Python programming. So I was making like a RESTful API, and I wanted to consume, of course, JSON data, being most people use JSON to consume REST data, to consume RESTful APIs. If you look at it that way, when I tried, it was only 2 lines of code for me to convert my data into JSON. And that was pretty easy with Python. And with other languages like Go, it's also easy. With PHP, it's also easy because I've worked with all those. And it's just people are really vast in thinking. And it's good to go out there and like look at what there is, because if you don't have something built in, it's probably in a library. Somebody has made it for you, which is okay. So there's no specific language which deals with SOAP easily, with REST easily. All of them, I'd say, deal with REST APIs and JSON equally. But when it comes to using XML, HAL, and HAL is more like JSON because of usually uses JSON -HAL. XML, I'd say Java, because Java was the first one, and SOAP was introduced way before way before REST. So I'd say XML. I usually feel like Java deals with XML very easily. When it comes to YAM, I haven't met anybody. I personally haven't interacted with using YAM to transmit data info. I use it in project definitions, configuration files, but I don't use it to transmit data to and fro. So I don't have much knowledge on YAM at all. Yeah. I don't know how I'll phrase it, but this is more of a people's opinion than more of the REST architecture itself. And when it comes to dealing with people, it's a bit tricky. You lead a whole cohort, and I know you know all the kinds of tricks somebody has to use, but sometimes some don't work, some work. I'd say that I've grown to understand that you'll never grow unless you accept change. And accepting change sometimes means moving to what you are really used to do. And that explaining it to a developer is pretty tricky. I remember I used to do some things, and that people used to tell me, do this, do this, do this. And until the day I experimented by myself, is that when I really said, like, oh, this is like really awesome, like I should be doing things this way. It's much more professional, it makes much more sense. I think sometimes, okay, I don't know if this is, I'm a developer, I'm not an entrepreneur, I'm not a business, I'm not a business person, but developers learn best from failing. We learn best by doing the wrong thing, then trying to look at a way we were suggested and saying like, you know what, Kiri suggested this to me, and what I've been trying has failed. And Kiri suggested this to me, and let me try it and let's see if it works. And eventually, of course, it works because it was a better suggestion, it was an improvement to everything else. The other thing is that, I'm not sure about this, but is that we succumb to authority. We succumb to authority when authority is given in a much more stricter way. So, for example, is like in Andela, we learn a lot of things. There are things I didn't want to learn. So, for example, continuous integration. Like you need to know a bit of almost everything. I didn't want to go and deal with the servers. I know there's somebody else supposed to deal with the servers, but you're told like, hey, yo, the servers are down. Deal with it. I'll be back. I'm like, I can't. And the best answer, which usually silences any form of any kind of developer, is that you can. You can. Like if you've done this and you've done all these other things, is you can. And I'm not hearing anything else for you that it's impossible. If somebody else has done it, why don't you do it? And when you're left at that position, is that you either do it or you get fired because you didn't do it. And you don't want to lose your job, or you don't lose the money, lose the money that you wanted to work with. So, as you see, my explanation is on a people's base. It's not like on an architecture base. It's very hard for people to move to a new, so for example, my phone runs on Android 4.2. The latest Android is 6. This year, I'm sure they'll release 7. And believe me, I'm not moving until my phone dies. And if you look at that state, it's more of a person's opinion than the I know 7 is awesome. I know 7 has been improved and everything else. But because mine still works, and maybe someday it will be killed, that's when I'll move. So REST falls in the same situation. I think the biggest lesson I've learned is that technology does not surpass human interventions. It does not. We say technology will take over everything, but it's us. It's humans who are pushing it. We're the ones who make this. We're the ones who push it to the next level. So as much as we make our technology, adaptation will always be. Like, for example, Angular 2 has been released. Believe me, I went to the pages of Angular 2 over 100 times. I was looking at it this way, and I was like, I'm not going there. I'll stay with 1.5. It's okay. I'll keep them. But as long as these are days, like maybe if my senior developer, my senior trainer or coordinator came and said, hey, this project is supposed to be done by Angular 2. The client does not want anything else, just wants Angular 2. Do you have an option? I don't. So I just have to adopt it. In other cases, some people actually just they're cognitive. They have like this cognitive, and they just adopt things easily. So like when 2 comes out, they dive into it, look into it. So it's a tricky aspect, but you sit in a very good position at HIAB, and I think you know this more than me. I'm learning them, you know them more than me.
Wow, that's awesome.
Personally, I haven't faced such challenges, and I'm grateful. I'm thankful. I'm thankful because if I had faced them then, I feel I'd handled them more stupidly than actually right now. It's being a developer. If the developers in this place, it's a journey. And I remember there's a time I used to say, hey, I'm the HTML5 king and PHP king. Then after a while or so, PHP didn't make sense at all to me. And I'm speaking really bad about PHP. Like you'd find me like making fun of PHP every day. And at some point I was saying like I'm PHP king. And then eventually when I learned a couple of languages, right now I've learned at least four programming languages: Go, Python, JavaScript, and PHP over time. I don't feel so boastful. So I think it's a big challenge when you start out development, because programming is exciting. It's exciting when you start it out, and then when you start learning new things, you get very excited. And at some point, you think like you have all the knowledge in the world about a specific programming language or specific system. If you asked me about REST a year ago, I couldn't describe it. I could have just told you, you make requests by a GET, you get back JSON. I didn't know even it's a system architecture, but I knew how to use it. And we say ignorance is bliss, but only bliss to some point. At that point, it was bliss for me because I didn't see the bigger picture. Most of us think that we'll remain developers for the entire, and I remember having this argument actually with the same guy who's asked me this question, is that I used to think, I stopped. I used to think I'd remain a developer for the rest of my life. So like I'm 40 years there, doing some code and stuff like that. Then you realize when you get good at these things, people start pushing you towards management. And when you move towards management, you stop actually coding. But you understand everything that is being done. And then there's the new generation, or the new guys who have come in, who are now where you were before. Okay, in that sense. Or there are these like the old guys who were born in a previous age where these things were not there. Where soap matters. So I think because he's brought it up, if I was going to explain something to a really old guy who's used to soap, I'd make a comparison the same way I did. I'd look at what we're trying to achieve. Are we trying to make people carry specific actions to our servers, or are we trying to collect data, create data, and send it out as resources to the users? And if you look at that point and you argue with that point, and you tell the guy, I know SOAP is good, but look at REST. We are doing a data-oriented system. We are trying to give people data. People are trying to read our data. So it's more data-driven than actually action-driven. They're not trying to do transactions. They're not trying to do like specific actions. And we don't really need to secure these actions because we're using, like for example, I didn't know, like back then, I didn't know get is actually safe. It's safe and important. I didn't know that. I didn't know post is important. I had to first actually research about the word itself, go to the dictionary, find out the meaning of idempotent in the first place, and before you move on to that. So if you look at that stage, if you're moving towards, in most cases, you're moving towards product management or project management, you need to know these architectures. You need to really like go research, learn them, understand them. As a developer, you don't really need to know them because you're developing systems. You just need to make the systems work in a specific way that you've been told. And as a product manager, you are, in most cases, such people face that situation because you have people higher than you who are asking you questions. Why are you doing this the same way you're doing? So you really need to know what you're doing. You really need to know what is SOAP? What are the advantages of SOAP? Why was it made in the first place? So actually, even before SOAP, there was a system known as CORB, Common Object Request Broker Architecture. It was released in 1991. That was the version before it. So if somebody could have faced the same situation back then, right? Why is SOAP better than Corba? So if you look at that, it's good to like really do deep research, then look at the system you're trying to build in the first place. Does it fit the SOAP basis, or does it fit the REST basis? Is it data-driven? Is it action-driven? Do you need a protocol because you need to make it really secure? Or do you need just like a way of people communicating with it? Yeah.
I think we